Hello everyone. Good evening.
Hi, hello.
Hello, good evening. Emi. Yeah, good evening. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome, Professor Mateos. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome to class, everyone. We are happy to have all of you in session. Um, all right, for the mentees, please, just before we start, I would like to encourage you to send notices to your group so that we can have quite a number of people on the call. We're a bit scanty, right? So please let's do that as quick as possible so that we'll start the session right about now. So we will not be wasting any time. We'll be getting straight into today's session. We are currently in week 5 of the JIIPCC Mentorship and Internship program under data privacy and protection. And we have quite a stack list for for today in terms of the mentors that we would have in class. Right, I can see we already have, I think, about 3 of our mentors already on the call, and I want to welcome all of them in a special way. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to having a very, very interesting discourse today in class. So just to get us settled in, today we'll be discussing navigating the rules of data regulations, the rules of a data protection officer, right? And that will be the central theme for today's discourse. What we'll be doing in terms of the agenda for today, we'll be taking 20 minutes each for each mentor, to give their discourse on this session. We'll take 20 minutes each for their presentation, and then we'll go to the mentees. They will also take, I think, about 10 minutes for their presentations. We'll go back to the mentors for the mentors for their feedback to the presentations. We'll take questions and then call it a day. All right. So just to introduce the mentors we are expecting in today's class. We're expecting Mr. Emmanuel Iwire. He's currently not on call, but we hope he's able to join us soon. Secondly, we're also expecting Mr. Ridwan Badmos. Okay, we already have in class Mr. Mateos Passos. Sorry, sir, if I didn't get the pronunciation of your name. You can help me with that when you are up. Mr. Mateos is a data protection officer, Europe at Cycle K, member of the EDPBs, pools of experts, former global data protection officer at Bolt, former data protection officer at L'Oréal, Portugal, and then former assistant data protection officer at the European Association of Data Protection Professionals, co-founder at Data UX, a Brazilian consulting and training company in data protection, information security, and related matters such as artificial intelligence and blockchain. Since 2004, he has been an assistant professor in different universities, working in several higher education institutions in Brazil and Portugal. So if you are interested in training, course mentoring, or participating in lectures and events, do hesitate to contact him at, so that is his contact info. We'll do well to send the flyers to your group so that if at all you need to get in touch with Mr. Mateos, you can kindly do that. Also in class today, we're expecting, or we already have Mrs. Osas Benedita Ezekiel Obiazele. Sorry, Ma, if I didn't get the pronunciation of your last name. Mrs. Benedicta is a distinguished legal professional with over 6 years of expertise in infrastructure, mining, oil and gas law with a wealth of experience from both public and private sector, currently serving as a senior specialist assistant on legal matters to the Edo State Ministry of Infrastructure. In her current role, she provides pragmatic and strategic legal counsel, oversees contract management, as well as ensure regulatory compliance with the provisions of the state's public procurement law and the PFM Act. OSA's credentials include AI career, essential certification from ALX Africa, several trainings in public procurement, implementations, implementations her skill set encompasses contract reviews, policy drafting, strategic leadership, communication, negotiation, and updates project coordination across various environments. She holds a Bachelor's of Laws degree from the University of Benin and an LLB from the Nigerian Law School. Her legal acumen is evidenced in her successful negotiation of numerous contracts safeguarding compliance and clients' interests. Furthermore, OSAS is committed to community service, having volunteered as a legal advisor for SME owners at the PACE Foundation. Her expertise in legal advisory, project management, contract administration, policy formulation, and AI integration is in the legal process makes her sorry makes her as a top tier professional in her field. Thank you so much, Ms. Benedicta, for joining in. We're happy to have you on call. Sorry, I think I'm missing the flyer of a mentor. That is Mr. Ayo Timothy. Sorry, sir. I will try to see if I can drop your flyer quickly so that I can share it in class. All right, sorry about that. Just to quickly run through our last mentor for today. Okay. Our last mentor for today is Mr. Timothy Sampson Ayuo. Mr. Ayuo is a certified data protection officer with 4 years experience in data privacy and protection. Of note, he is a senior research assistant and AGDPO in the VC's office at Moyes University. He serves as a full-time DPO. He's skilled in risk management, data privacy and protection, regulatory compliance, data protection training, and guiding data protection impact assessments, experience in data breach mitigation, risk management, cross-border data transfer, and delivering tailored data protection training, well-versed in the General Data Protection Regulation and Kenya's Data Protection Act. IU combines international and local expertise to ensure robust compliance. In addition, he has strengths in managing humanitarian data in emergency contexts where privacy safeguards are critical. Member of the IAPP and the DPGSK in Kenya, is a contributor of over 35 legal articles to the daily national newspaper. Thank you, Mr. Timothy, for joining. We are also happy to have you in the session. Like I said, we have a very stacked line for today's class, and we hope that the mentees that are in session will be open enough to listen to everything that will be shared in today's class and get to benefit overall from the session. So what we'll be doing is we'll be taking a 20 minutes each presentation from each of the mentors. We'll start with Mrs. Benita, and then we'll move over to Prof. Mateos, and then we'll take Mr. Timothy's presentation last. All right, so Mrs. Benedicta, would like to hear from you. Share your thoughts on the topic for today. We're talking about DPOs and their roles. So please, Ma, we just want you to ease us into the session for today.
Oh, okay. Good evening, everyone. It's a privilege to be part of this lineup of astute experts in the field. And like I always say, I'm ready to learn from everyone. And I do not believe that one person is a repository of all knowledge. Instead, we are all a lineup of persons who are learning from each other. So I would like to thank the JIIPCC for this opportunity. And I really hope that we all learn from one another today. So today we'll be talking about, or we'll be going through the concept of the data protection officer, navigating data protection, the regulations, the essential roles of a data protection officer. I always start by saying that we are in an era, a new dawn. So there's an imaginary train going through various parts of the world today, carrying with it the technological revolutions that are needed for growth in the economy today. And on that train, we have very key proponents. We have the artificial intelligence and we have data protection. I see them as a Siamese twins in a symbiotic relationship. They move together to aid and ease life now. In fact, I like to say we are in the fourth quarter of the Industrial Revolution. So we can say this is a technological revolution that we all have to get on board. So in terms of data protection, this is key in terms of safeguarding the inherent rights of individuals today. We can say that data protection can come under human rights. It is the basic and inherent rights of human beings to, to be advocated for in terms of sticking to privacy, in terms of sticking to their personal dignity, in terms of sticking to their personal items being safeguarded online, regardless of wherever it may be or regardless of wherever they've stepped into. And in going in this direction, we'll be focusing on Nigeria, where we are, because that's exactly what we want to do today. And in order to understand data protection, we must understand, or in order to understand what the roles of a data protection officer is, we must first of all take a step back and ask ourselves, what is data protection? Data protection is the safeguarding of the information of individuals as basely as can be placed, the safeguarding of individuals' details online in whatever, whether online archives or physical archives, from every form of third party unauthorized interference. And the things that we must understand too, that there are core principles that follow these concepts. We have the principle of lawfulness. It must be lawful. It must be fair. There must be transparency. There must be a purpose for which we hold people's data or details as regards organizations or a certain or particular sect of persons. We must not hold ransom or hold hostage the details of individuals. That I call data napping. Instead of kidnapping, I call it data napping. So you're actually holding persons or people's details to ransom because of the opportunity, authority you seem to place yourself in. And so these are what the core principles are trying to mitigate. And also globally, we have the GDPR, the NDPR, which is the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation, and those are the things that help to in this protection of persons' data. Now, if we're trying to look at the data protection regulations, in Nigeria, we have the Constitution, the General Application and Implementation Directive, which is GAID. We have the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation, the NDPR, the Cybercrime Child Rights Act, the HIV and AIDS Anti-Discrimination Act 2014, NITA Act, and then we also have sector-specific data protection regulations. We have the registration of telephone subscribers, national health, credit reporting, CBN, and others as they pertain to specific sectors in the country. But there is one thing you can pinpoint from all these is this: there, there is a need to create laws, regardless of whether sector specific or general in nature, to safeguard and to regulate the authorization, the processing of these data, of the personal data of persons in the country. Now, in order to understand how to navigate, we must marry the laws, the regulations with the proponents or the guardians of the data. Like I jokingly, I see they are the guardians of the galaxy, but now they're the guardians of data, which is the data protection. You cannot talk about laws if they are not persons or there are no institutions or mechanisms put in place to make sure that the regulations put or written down are carried out. Because the bane of every amazing law is implementation. If there's no implementation, there is no task force, there is nobody to make sure those laws are put in place, then they are nothing short of lyrics to a song. So that is where the data protection officer comes in. The data protection officer comes in as a middleman. I Personally, I believe a data protection officer is at the middle and at the end. At the middle, in between the controller and the processor, to try and make sure that everything works or is in compliance. And at the end, to make sure that after all has been said and done, everything was properly taken care of. Is to make sure that, okay, after making a wonderful uh, processing or controlling of data, it takes a step back and analyzes and evaluates what has gone on. It has it through a protection impact assessment. It looks at it and say, okay, what are the I's we have dotted? What are the T's that we have crossed? What are the things that we have done? So this is what a data protection officer is and what he does. In total understanding, a data protection officer ensures compliance with data protection laws. He could act independently or by virtue of Section 32 of the Nigerian Data Protection Act, or he could act as a contractor or on a service contract to make sure that the data of persons are managed properly and they are compliant with the Nigerian Data Protection Act. In going forward to the Nigerian Data Protection Act by way of just understanding the law, it says that the Data Protection Act, that's section 32 sub 1, sub 2 says it could be an employee, and also the role of the data protection officer is to advise the data controller or the processor on, especially based on the regulations of the Act, and to make sure that there's compliance. And such a person can also act as a contact point or point of contact for the Commission. That's why most times in organizations, it is mandated that the number or the contact details of the data protection officer is placed on the company's website in case of any form of breach. That person is a point of contact in terms of the Commission and in terms of any issue that has arisen. So, in going forward, we have to understand that apart from what has been said, a core responsibility of a data protection officer is one, advise. A data protection officer or a DPO must advise on data protection compliance. That is the key. Apart from every other thing, this is the grown norm of the responsibility of a data protection officer. I like to say, okay, just like an in-house counsel or a lawyer, your job as a DPO is to make sure that everything works in alliance or in alignment with the law, and also not only to advise, to monitor and also train staff, raise awareness, look at risk management and breach and any form of breach, and then to handle every form of breach also. And so also a responsibility of a DPO is to make sure that professionalism is carried out on every frontier. This is or these are the core responsibilities that the DPO must take to heart, because where such a DPO is lacking in such areas, not only would the major reason for getting a DPO be defeated, but then it puts the data of the persons in that institution, whether controller or processor, at risk. Because for one not to know the reason why which he or she has been put in a position, there is nothing short of abuse that will be found there. So these are the important things that we must take note of in terms of a data protection officer. In fact, the commission, by virtue of Section 33, says that a data protection officer must be one that has a requisite level of expertise in relation to the act in order to monitor, to audit, and to report. And the person must understand the regulations, the guidelines, the directives, and code of conduct issued by the commission. These are the things. The DPO is the gatekeeper. Is the one that makes sure the DPO makes sure that things do not get out of hand. And even when it seems like things are getting out of hand, there are requisite channels that that DPO must follow or take in order to make sure that the issue is sorted out. Now, I would like to bring to fore some insights that I got while trying to go through this concept of regulations and the data protection officer. We find that aside the law, we also have the commission that helps in making sure that people who flout or organizations that flout these provisions are properly probed and they are properly brought to book or fined. For example, in August, Nigeria probed 1,369 organizations in major data privacy crackdown. And also recently, MultiChoice was fined 766.2 million naira for data privacy breaches. And this now, aside from the issue with that of Fidelity last year, it stands as the largest single penalty issued by the Commission so far. So these are case studies to showcase what the law, the importance of making a law is, and what's important when the Commission knows what it ought to do and takes a stand. Now, it can not only take a stand, persons who are entrusted with that responsibility must take up that stand too to make sure that things like this do not occur anymore. Because once there's a breach, not only would the processor or the controller be made to take the fall, but you're also talking about the 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 personalities, the online personalities that of persons that have been thrown out to possible hackers or other things. And in all of this, we must understand that the most important factors here are the owners of this data and not even those other people, because they have entrusted unto us, the DPO, the controller, the processor, they have entrusted into our care their data. Just as we have different hospitals, you and I use different hospitals. Maybe if you have different HMOs or as you please, and your data is in each of these institutions. Your children's names are in each of these schools, your bank verification numbers, your national identification numbers, your staff ID, your workplace, and all those things. They are all components of data that can make one identify you as a person, even if they do not know your name. By virtue of knowing those things, you can actually get to know the personalities of those persons. So where there are breaches, it leaves that person virtually naked, because anybody can stumble across your data and make do with whatever they feel like. And if there's nobody to make sure that all these things are sorted out, then the point of data protection is lost. And that is why when the when Nigeria probed these companies, which included 795 financial institutions, 392 insurance brokers, 35 insurance companies, 10 pension firms, and 136 gaming operators, it brought a form of trust back on to persons who want to deal online with their businesses. And this is the importance of DPOs, bringing to fore every form of breach and making sure that they are being handled. And this is makes us fall back on the core responsibilities of data protection and data protection officers, how they are important in our economy today and what they are needed for, and how their responsibilities cannot be sidelined anymore. It is time to take up that step to make sure that, aside these laws, because the regulations that I put there are so many, aside this, it is most important that we are able to implement them. As data protection officers, we are like a band of armies that arise to make sure that the data protection is enforceable. Not only enforceable, it's alive, well, and kicking, to make sure that there is trust in the system, there is growth in the economy, and there is a fine and a form of penalties meted out to persons who default the provisions. Now, what are the challenges in navigating data protection? We have increasing cyber threats and data breaches. With the level of artificial intelligence right now, there are also it's also creating a form of loophole in terms of threats and breaches. And then this now boils down to making it less trustworthy. So it's a growing challenge. There's also the challenge of balancing innovation with compliance. It's said that technology runs faster than the law. So today, what we are talking about will be more rebound in 2 weeks, maybe in 2 weeks or 3 weeks' time, because the technological advancement has also advanced further. So the law needs to catch up with the regulation. The law needs to catch up with the activities in terms of breaches and in terms of innovations that come our way. Also, the cost of compliance for organizations. This is a challenge. This is a challenge in terms of the gauge now, the gauge 2025. It's a challenge. And then for me, the most important challenge here is shortage of data protection officers. It's been said that Nigeria is short of data protection officers. Now we have 10,000, but Nigeria needs 500,000 now, 500,000 data protection officers now. So we are short of 490,000. So when there are less, and we can say and argue, oh, but there are lots of experts, in fact, on this call now, a lot of experts in data protection, but we can only do as much as we can because it's when work is shared properly that persons can be accounted for. I want to use something relatable. In the school now, we know the effect that we have if a teacher is to teach a class of 100 or compared to if that same class is divided and different teachers are assigned, we know how far it will go. And so, with a wonderful level of astute minds, maybe in the 10,000 pools that are available now, cannot be compared to if we were 500,000 data protection officer let out into the country today. And in the matter of months, we'll see the outcome of such. And so that's why it's important. So we need 490,000 additional DPOs to meet regulatory demands because as we are few now, a lot are slipping through the cracks. Now, for our students listening, how do I get on this? Maybe I'm not yet a lawyer, maybe I'm not yet this or I'm that. There are opportunities for you. There are career paths in data protection and privacy law. The certifications in the NDPR, DPCO, the CIPP, though expensive, you can always augment by going for online courses such as the Coursera and other known ones. Also, there are also roles for young professionals in terms of internship. And I'm so grateful for JIIPC creating this platform to grow young minds and to make them know that they are not too small or for them not to think they are too unqualified to step into this because it's when you're actually grooming yourself that you can look back and say, well, I've come far and then also contribute to society. And also opportunities for students are research and data analysts. So I just finished my master's in uh, I just finished my LLM, and the core of my projects bordered on data protection as a human right, as well as developing a framework for artificial intelligence. And from what I can see is this: the research pool is quite dry because not many of us are tapping into the research that is needed to bring in frameworks, to bring in policies, to bring in agenda that can help in making sure that the data protection organization or environment is properly guarded. And it was it was an eye-opening thing that we need researchers. And this is where students can come in, research, data analysts. This is it. Because from what the a report came out at the beginning of the year about the the jobs that will be taking over soon are those were administrative executives, but nothing about data protection, because the data protection opportunity has come, the market, the job openings have come to stay. And so these are opportunities where we can hone our skills in terms of research in academia and all, to hone our skills and make sure that we make that change. In conclusion, data protection means it's a compendium of trust, compliance, and innovation. And so the data protection officer is central, is key to the organizational compliance of data processing and controlling in every organization. So it is now up to us as a form of call to action to build awareness, to seek opportunities, embrace ethical data privacies, to make sure that there's transparency, efficiency, and there is also an opportunity raised to others to make sure that more data protection officers come on board. And then it comes to mind presently now how incentives can even be given out to young lawyers to make sure that this field is also made attractive to them, because this is what we need, this is what is needed. We cannot hoard it, we can only share it. And this is my contribution today. So, in conclusion, in order to navigate the data protection regulations, we must have efficient data protection officers who know exactly what they should do, when they should do it, who have the laws at their fingertips, not to know every area, but to know where to find them in case of breaches, and most especially in safeguarding the data of individuals in the country today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Benedita, for your very wonderful presentation. I am sure just like me, the other participants in class were listening adept and, getting to learn quite a lot from the points you shared. So we really, really do appreciate. So yes, like I said, we have a start class for today, and we have two other mentors that are on call that we also want to hear from, share their thoughts and what they had prepared for us in today's session. And also for, I think they're about also 20 minutes thereabouts. We also want to hear from them both. But we'll first go with Professor Mateos. Thank you so much, sir, for joining. We are happy to have you on call. So, sir, we just want to hear from you, share your thoughts in regards to the subject matter for today. You're welcome, sir.
Yeah, well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for the invite, for being here and allowing me to share a little bit of my day-to-day practices, especially because, I've been working as a DPO in different companies, as you introduced me at the very beginning, for almost like 10 years, 8.5 years. So it is good to share that experience and some thoughts that I have actually. So I will just share here just one slide actually, because I'm bringing, and I hope that you can see. So yeah, I hope that you can see. Oops, sorry, I think that not this one. Just a second. Yeah, here. Yeah, I think and hope that you can see now the presentation. Please let me know if you can't. But actually, the idea here today, at least from my side, it will be a little bit difficult to bring something new after the presentation of Ms. Benedicta, which, by the way, I congratulate and I agree like with everything that you said, but I would like actually to bring some provocations in terms of food for thought, thinking about the role of the data protection officer in practice. And before actually jumping to these, what I call like first tasks, let me just explain my point of view here. We all know the legislation, of course, that I'm working in Europe, and although already work with Nigeria like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Of course, the things probably have changed in that period, but I know a little bit of the idea of the Nigerian legislation. So it's more or less similar to GDPR. So I will consider them as equivalent here. And in that way, actually, I mean, I think that the role of the DPO is, of course, defined in the legislation. And we all know that the DPO has to, like, to supervise and to advise, to provide recommendations, to check for compliance, and etc. But at the same time, one thing that sometimes is very difficult, I would say, is how do we translate that in practice? Because when all of us read like, oh, the GPO has to, well, check for the company's compliance with the legislation, for example. Okay, what does that mean? What does that entail in terms of practical actions? Or when we are talking about risks, and by the way, I do think that the most important thing that a DPO does, and actually the most important knowledge a DPO must have, in my view, is to perform risk analysis, to understand what is risk, what we call is risk. I mean, it was mentioned, for example, data breach, and then when we usually say, oh, the risk is low, the risk is medium, the risk is high to data subjects, for example, or it will bring like problems to the company and whatever. What I mean is, what does that mean? So that's my point of view here, and this is what I wanted to share and well, bring my ideas, of course, for discussion here, because I do think, again, and I know that I'm repeating myself a little bit, I do understand and I do agree that, of course, we have to understand the legislation. As was mentioned before, we don't have just one legislation to be followed. As you probably know, even here in Europe, I mean, everyone mentions GDPR, but actually GDPR is only like the tip of the iceberg, because we have national legislations in each country. We have other types of legislation, as the so-called the Privacy Directive, which regulates cookies and marketing. We have labor legislation, because some labor legislations, for example, as the Portuguese one, they also talk about privacy. So, I mean, of course, that we have to understand the legislation, but being a DPO, in my view, it goes beyond of only, and of course, quote unquote here, like only knowing the legislation. I think that actually the body of knowledge that a DPO must have is like much wider than knowing the legislation. So this is why I wanted I want to bring here like 5 main topics, of course, that I'll dig into each of them a little bit. I will share this presentation with you, so don't worry. And then, I mean, thinking on these practical actions, how can we reconcile not only the legislation, but actually like the day-to-day job, and what knowledge must a DPO have? So, like I said, the first one, imagine that you were just hired as a DPO, and Ms. Benedicta just mentioned that, well, we have here, you have in Nigeria a lack of 490,000 DPOs. So everyone wants to take a piece of that. So you were hired as a DPO. What's the first thing that you have to do? So here, of course, I bring my point of view. So I think that actually you need to obtain knowledge of the company's vision, for example, in terms of privacy, because and let's be very practical here. I mean, we all know. I mean, ideally, we know that companies need to, how can I say, they need to be in compliance. That's what I mean. Of course, they need to be in compliance. They have to follow the legislation and achieve their objectives. I mean, the legislation's objectives. But we all know that sometimes companies will value a little bit more profit and not compliance. And I'm not saying that oh, that's terrible. I mean, it's an option. It's a business option. And as a DPO, I mean, I don't want to say that it is wrong or that it is right. I mean, for me, not that it doesn't matter, but it's not my job as a DPO to think if it's wrong or right. But you have to understand the point of view of the company. And why do I think that that's important? Because if you come to a company, for example, that says, well, I want to comply with the legislation, and for that, to achieve that, please, you as the DPO, provide me the bare minimum. What's needed for me as a company not to be fined, for example. That's one approach that you will have as a DPO. But you can come to another company, you can work for another company, and then this other company will say, no, no, no. Actually, I don't want only to be compliant. I also want to make privacy a value of my company. I mean, I want to use that as leverage against my competition, for example. I want to be, I don't know, socially privacy responsible or something like that. And then if that's the company's vision, then your approach would be completely different. So this is, I think, one of the first steps to understand the company's point of view in terms of privacy. And usually I say, does the company only wants to be compliant, or the company also wants to make that, to turn privacy into profit, for example? So this is something that you will have to understand. Second, the actual status of data implementation, because again, when we talk about data protection and when we read through the legislations, of course, that I think you all know, we have to build a privacy program. We have to manage privacy internally in the organization. And what are the steps to achieve that? So the first thing, or one of the first things, would be to understand what the company already has implemented. So is there any system? And when I say systems or management systems, of course, I'm not talking about apps. I'm talking about procedures, policies and procedures. So does the company already have procedures, for example, to enter a data subject request? Does the company already have a procedure to review an automated decision, for example? So does the company already have a procedure to, well, get in touch with authorities? So we have to understand what the company has and what's needed to achieve or to try to achieve full compliance. Third, analyze, of course, the data protection policy, if it exists. And it's connected to the first topic because, and by the way, when I say policy here, of course, I'm mentioning like an internal documentation that defines the strategy of the company, what it wants to achieve and how it sees that topic, that specific topic. While when I mention procedures, of course, I'm thinking about something more practical, like how to do that, how to implement a policy through a procedure. So you have to check the privacy policy, what the company envisages, again, when it says or mentions privacy. Analyze the inventory of processes and personal data. Of course, you have to understand what the company is doing with personal data. I mean, is the company only like acting as a data processor, for example? So here, and it's just like a generic example, we could think that, well, as a processor, maybe the company only processes personal data. I mean, its own personal data would be its employees. And then regarding their employees, these companies, data processors, actually, they are not data processors. They are data controllers because they are defining the means and the purposes of that. But when they process data of other companies, then they are data processors. So you will have to understand that relationship. And if the company is a data controller, you will have to understand what the company does with the data. I mean, all ideally, again, all data processing activities. And not only, of course, that initially is like very broad, but with time you'll have to go into the details. Because, for example, and I usually give this example. One thing, when you think about marketing, so one thing is if a company has a website and then it collects data there, and then the same company internally, it has their own servers, and then it stores the data in those servers. And then this company has an internal marketing team, and this marketing team will access that database, and this marketing team will send the emails. I'm thinking very, very simply here, like email marketing. This is one context that will connect to the risks that I'm going to mention in some minutes. But imagine a different situation where a company doesn't have a server, so it hires an ISP or a company to provide the website. Then this other company stores the data there. No, it stores in the cloud in Amazon or Google or whatever. So there's another company, which is the marketing company, which will access that data and then send the emails to the data controller's customers. So in the first situation, I mean, everything is controlled by the data controller. In the second, we have at least 3 different companies. I mean, the data controller plus the one which stores the website and the collection of the data. The second is the storage of the data itself. The third is the marketing team, which will also process personal data. So we have here the same activity, but the process is completely different. Hence, the risk will be completely different. And then, of course, meeting with process and data owners internally, like HR, finance team, because finance may process personal data, marketing team, of course, IT team, because IT team will also process personal data. So legal and so on. So every area of the company usually will process personal data, and then you have to know what they do and what types of personal data they process. Then another very practical thing is, of course, monitoring compliance may be one of the most important tasks of the DPO. But again, in practice, what does that mean? So it means that you have to understand what those data protection principles mean. I mean, the privacy by design, and here I'm thinking in a more generic way on the 7 principles created by Dr. Anne Kavukin from Canada. So she developed those privacy by design principles, which means, again, and I hope that you get my point here. I mean, we're at the very high level situation when we say the DPO has to monitor compliance. Then we move from the high level abstract to a little bit more concrete when we say, well, the DPO has then to apply the privacy by design, has this approach, privacy by design. Okay, but then we can move to an even more practical approach, which is, okay, so if we're thinking about those 7 privacy by design principles by Dr. Anne Kavukin, so how do we implement that? How do we, for example, when she says, well, it's like security end to end, and then how do we implement that in practice? How do we as DPOs check if a data processing activity is really implementing this end-to-end security in that case? So this is the approach that I think a DPO must have here. We have to think about legal basis. I mean, again, I'm deriving that from GDPR in terms of, are we going to use consent all the time? And probably not. Actually, I think that consent is not the best legal basis, of course, unless there is something specific in the legislation, but usually consent has to be free, consent has to be informed, consent has to be unambiguous. So it's somewhat complicated to get that. For example, in an employment environment. So would you use consent? Well, employees are usually considered as vulnerable data subjects. I mean, if you're an employee in a company, imagine the company, your manager comes to you and say, hey, do you agree with this or that? Doesn't matter. And how do you feel? Do you really feel completely safe, completely free to say to your manager, no, I don't agree. I don't want that. I want something else. So consent probably is not a good legal basis in the employment relationship. Then what are going to use, like performance of a contract or vital interests, right? Or public interest or legitimate interest. So we have to know the legal basis, but we have to also know how to implement them. Data subjects' rights, I already mentioned, it's connected to the first part. I mean, yeah, data subjects, they have access rights, for example. Okay, how do we implement that in practice? How can we as EPOs come to the authority and say very boldly, my company is compliant when it comes to fulfilling the right of access, for example? It means that you have to understand how it happens. And when we think how it happens, I mean, will the DPO answer our requests? Actually, I step back, will requests come to the DPO, or will requests be answered, at least as a first line of defense, by customer service, for example? And if it's customer service, then we have to think as DPOs in a script and training to the customer service so they know how to identify such requests, so that they know what to do when such a request comes. So we have to think about it. Then security and incidents, it was already mentioned in terms of data breaches. Again, what is a data breach? So we all know the definition. Oh, it's a breach of confidentiality, integrity, availability of data. But we can have breaches, for example, not in the sense of data being exposed, but in the sense of lack of compliance. If someone is having access to the data, and internally, I mean, and they shouldn't have access to that data. Or we can have a breach, again, not in the sense of exposing the data to third parties, but if the company is collecting more data than is necessary to achieve its purposes. I mean, it's not a data breach, of course, in its traditional sense, but it is a breach of the legislation. So you have to be aware of that. Then maintenance of records of processing activities, cooperation with the authorities. So this is also very important. How do we approach the authority? We'll always say, oh, no, authority, you are right and I'm wrong. Okay, or not, or will be like the contrary. Assessment of processors. So are we, I mean, our company, the company I work for, are we engaging with a processor that doesn't guarantee the security of personal data? Is that okay or not? And if we're assessing these future data processors, what should we do? What should we assess? What are the questions that we have to ask them to be sure that they are complying with the legislation, and maybe do an initial audit? And this actually goes to risks. So knowing how to perform a DPIA, a data protection impact assessment, it means that the DPO has to know at least a little bit about information security. Not only privacy, I mean, not only from a legal point of view, but actually from a technical point of view. Actually, this one is connected to the next one, which I already gonna put together here. So this is why I'm mentioning here these two ISO standards, the 31000 and then 27557. They both are related to risk assessments. And this is why I mentioned at the very beginning, I think that this is the most important knowledge a DPO must have. Because when I'm assessing everything, even what be it what the company already has, or be it a new data processing activity, at the end, I have to understand what are the risks. Because if my job as the DPO is to provide advice, if my job is to recommend something, if my job is to check whether or not the company is compliant with the legislation, I need to understand what are the risks involved. And how do we define what is a privacy risk? How do we, like I said before, how do we define if the risk is like low, medium, or high? So we have to know how to perform those risk assessments. And this is why I always, and I use that in practice, actually, the ISO 31000, which is a standard for general risk assessment, and 27557, which is privacy risk assessment. And then when we think, what is a privacy risk assessment? Because if I'm going to perform a DPIA, a data protection impact assessment, I need to know what are the risks and where do they come from? So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can use these standards and others. Of course, I'm just mentioning these two here, but actually, last time I counted, we can think, including, of course, not only privacy, but also AI, because in practice, AI is coming to the DPO as another branch of the DPO's responsibility, at least in practice. So I counted around 40 ISO standards that are related to privacy or to AI in that case. So we have to know how to perform these preliminary risk analysis. We have to understand what are the authorities' criteria for risk, for privacy risks, and guidelines. And again, here risk, it comes, or I would like to mention it from a previous perspective, if I may say so. So when the company is starting a new data processing activity, so there we have to understand the risks, but also from the post factum, which is a data breach, for example, like it was mentioned before. What's the level of risk for the data subjects when a breach happens? So if that marketing database that I mentioned before, if it's completely encrypted and if the encryption algorithm is good, because it doesn't, it's very easy. And then I already connect to the next one. I mean, it's very easy for a DPO to say, oh, data needs to be encrypted. And that's right. But what's the algorithm? What's the encryption algorithm to be used? Because there are some encryption algorithms that are not secure. They don't secure the data right now as we speak. So it depends on the algorithm. This is why, and I know that when someone comes from the legal, it may be a little bit difficult, but I have this point of view. I mean, I'm a very strong believer that the DPO has to have at least a minimum technical knowledge, because if the DPO is recommending something, he or she needs to know what he or she is recommending. For example, I work with contracts. This week, there was an agreement between the company I work for, Circle K, and a future data processor, sorry. And in the agreement, someone wrote like, well, data will be pseudonymized. And because of that, data subjects can't be identified. And both from a legal perspective, but also from a technical perspective, that's not true. Because if data is pseudonymized, you can identify. I mean, if the data is anonymized, then you can't identify. So it was like a mistake in the agreement, but we had to understand these differences in practice. So this is why I included here advice on anonymization procedures. But the first one, evaluate information security programs. Of course, if the company you work for has an IT team, probably the IT team will do that assessment. But it's also good if you know, so that when you're meeting with the IT team, you don't just say, yes, yes, okay, agree. Because, well, it's your responsibility as the DPO to actually say, yes, this is okay, we can move forward. And the last one, of course, international transfers of personal data. I think that this is something that is very important, especially for good or for bad, but we know that countries are being, I wouldn't say restrictive, but putting more attention on international transfers of personal data. So we have to understand what are the criteria for international transfers of personal data, what are the legal mechanisms for such transfer. But again, also technically speaking, what are the technical mechanisms? And again, and then I finalize. I shut up, because if not, again, I could keep for longer here. But just a final example again this week. My company is engaging with a processor, and this processor has its sub-processors, and data was going to the US. okay, from Europe to the US. So I think you all know there are some, well, different points of view, let's put it like that, between Europe and the US in terms of how they see the protection of personal data and international transfers of personal data. But we have the data privacy framework, which is the adequacy decision from the EU saying that, yes, you can send data to the US, personal data to the US, if the company is self-certified. And that's perfectly fine. And then almost all companies rely on that mechanism. The problem is, that processor has 4 sub-processors, and 3 out of 4, they are self-certified in this data privacy framework. However, they are certified for non-HR data. And the data processing activity actually involves HR data. So as the DPO, I had to come to the business, to the project owner, and say, hey, you are engaging with a processor, and that's fine. However, its sub-processors, they are not compliant with the legislation because your project involves HR, I mean, personal data of our employees. And if this processor sends data to their sub-processors, we would be in non-compliance because we are allowing that transfer, but we are relying on a mechanism that says no HR data should be transferred. So this is the level of detail that the DPO has to take to pay attention so that they can actually help the company being compliant. So that's what I have for now. I hope that it was useful and interesting. And of course, I thank you again for your attention and patience, and well, happy to help with any questions.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Mateos. Sorry.
No, perfectly fine. No worries.
We really appreciate the shared thoughts in class. Just like the audiences, I also did enjoy your discourse. I also did enjoy your discourse. So we would be taking our last mentor, right, in class today. We'll be taking his discourse in class, and then yeah, we have Mr. Timothy. I'm trying to see if he's still on the call. Yes, Mr. Timothy, thank you so much, sir, for
Yes,
still. Yes, sir. So we just want to hear you also share your thoughts in roughly the next 20 minutes or so. So we would get on with the rest of class. You're very, very much welcome, Mr. Timothy.
Thank you very much for the intro. I think being in the esteemed company of Professor Matthias and Benedicta Ezekiel, I think it's a privilege. I appreciate their presentations, and really they've made my work a lot easier because I don't want to regurgitate what they've already talked about. At least they've given us the radar and the guidance, the true north with regard to the role of a data protection officer. My name is Timothy Ayuo. I come from Kenya, and I think some of you know Kenya is in East Africa. I am trained by Maastricht University on data protection officer skills. I have ECPC B DPO certification. I have a legal background. I'm a lawyer. I have a postgraduate diploma in law, which background I think is very crucial and integral to my work as a data protection officer in terms of interpreting the law and helping in compliance of my data controllers. I have been privileged to work as a DPO in the academia sector, in the education university, and working in the health sector, in a hospital, and also working in helping data incident or breach management in a financial institution. So the crux of my presentation will be based basically on also my experiences. So, okay, why would a student want to be a DPO? I don't think the motivating factor should be money. My advice would be, if you want to become a data protection officer, be a data protection officer because you're passionate about the work you're going to do as a data protection officer, and you will never work for a single day. I hope you understand what I'm talking about. Take it out of passion and you will enjoy your work. Money is secondary. Everybody's looking for money, that is true. But money will eventually come as long as you passionately do your work and you do your work diligently. So I had slides which I think I shared, and in the interests of time, I don't think I'm going to share my slides again, but I'll just make the presentation, which slide I know the presenters and the organizers will be able to share with you. So under Section 20 of the Protection Act in Kenya, we are told about the qualifications of a data protection officer. He ought to be somebody who is knowledgeable and professional and having certain skills to become a data protection officer. When you're talking about skills, what are we talking about? You ought to have project management skills because you'll be managing projects. You ought to have legal research skills because every contract you'll be going through, you ought to do some research to ensure that you do a perfect contract that would cover your data controller and expose them less to any risk with regard to data breaches. Other than that, contract drafting skills. You'll be drafting contracts rather between your data controller and the data processors, and the data processors and the data controllers, and vice versa. It can go either way. It can be two data controllers, it can be two data processors, but you will always have to guide. You need to have the data contract draft skills that can help your data controller draft watertight contracts that can help your data controller be free from the risk and exposure to breaches. The other skill you need is training skills. A data protection officer in an institution is a chief trainer of data protection, compliance, and skills. So the first order of the day as a data protection officer, gauge once you've gone into an institution, check their agreements and check whether they are really processing data, the laws or the regulations that govern processing of data. Once you fix the gaps here and there, there's what we call data. Just going around, walking around and seeing any risk you see on the face of it, prima facie risk that you can note from the employees that are working in the company. Go to the HR department, go to the marketing department, go to the reception department, go to management. So it's important that you have that, go down, bring the people on board like this and teach them on what the Data Protection Act entails. Another skill you need is cybersecurity skills. It's not core, but it's an element of data protection. And some people confuse data protection and data governance. Data governance is an aspect of data protection, but it's not the core of data protection. That is why you'll need to collaborate with a cybersecurity expert or an IT guy in your company to assist you. But on the base of it, as a foundation and the basis and bare minimum, as a data protection officer, you require skills, cybersecurity essential skills. Organizations like Cisco train those. Know a little bit of cybersecurity so that when you're talking even to the IT guys and they tell you about cybersecurity threats and they talk about penetration tests and they talk about a white hacker or a black hacker, you know what they're talking about. So indeed, basic cybersecurity skills are equally very fundamental to a data protection officer. What other skill do you need? You need communication skills. The language you're communicating with ought to be very simple. Avoid legalese when you're communicating with members of the public. Simplify and demystify all the legal mysteries around the law and make it so digestible to the public. I can tell you students to look at Dr. Solov. He's now called Professor Solov. Professor Solov has these things we call whiteboards. Whiteboards on what data protection and privacy entails. Make pictures, diagrams, cartoons that are easily digestible, even the security guys, with regard to data protection in your organization. Through that kind of mechanism, your communication skill will be brought out to the fore. Ensure you are this kind of person who can really make a difficult scenario look very simple by communication. And that would even come when you're getting the board buy-in. When you're working in an organization with a board, you ought to have a board buy-in for you to get support budget as a data protection officer to do your work. And let me tell you for free, without a budget as a data protection officer, you can't go anywhere. So the board has to be sold to your data protection and compliance to even allocate to help you as a data protector. Those are some of the data protection officer you ought to in challenges. There are so many challenges in organizations as a data protection officer, and one of them is independence. You'll find that there's a data breach in your organization, and your data controller is telling you to take lead in terms of managing that data breach. From my learning and training, I really don't think that is the right way to go. Even though people make an academic argument that a DPO should be at the forefront in helping in data breach mitigation, but it would create a conflict of interest if you take the lead. What do you need to do? You ought to guide. And that guide will only come from the skills I talked about beforehand. Guide them on how to go about managing a data breach when there is a data breach. Ensure you do a report entailing that data breach, forward it to the data controller and tell them now the first step, call the commission guys or the journalist guys to go and this. So indeed, your intentions as a DPO would work fairly and to a T or not. So independence is very crucial in terms of the role be allocated in the organization. You can't be an HR officer and a DPO at the same time. There is conflict of interest because even people in the HR office keep files and records. You can't crack the whip there if you are engrossed and absorbed in the work of HR and you are a DPO. So you ought to be from outside looking in, even though you're inside. So be very careful. You can't be a lawyer, the legal officer, and a DPO at the same time. And I think you've noted there are people who advertise for posts and they say we want a data protection officer who is going to double up as a legal officer at the same time. That is very wrong. Academically, it is wrong. Legally, in terms of even the laws here in Kenya, it's very wrong. Why? You will be conflicted as a DPO working as a legal officer and at the same time as a data protection officer. Your roles are symbiotic, but they are not one role. You depend on the legal office for information, and they also depend for information, but you are not one office. You are two separate offices. Further to that, you know very well that when you'll be talking to the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, you always talk to the Data Protection Commission as an independent office. And you are the person mandated by law to directly communicate with the Data Protection Commissioner with regard to matters data protection in the organization. For that reason, therefore, it's upon your data controller or the management of the company to ensure your records and contacts are with the Data Protection Commissioner and they are made public out there to the persons in the public to know the DPO at institution XYZ is Mr. Timothy Ayuo. His contact is this. If there's a data breach of contact, you can reach out to help you and assist you. The other challenge is budget. With your communication skills, the budget ought to come, even though it's not automatic. But still, once you're in that office, there's AI coming. And like Professor said, Professor Matthias and even Benedicta, AI is coming. Perhaps you were DPO before AI. And now that AI is coming, you need to upskill. You'll go to security ops, you'll go to IAP, and you need money. That funding will come from the DPO's budget. So you ought to have a budget as a DPO because that is the sling you will use to arm yourself. Trainings, you need to invite experts like Professor Matthias. At times, you need to invite them on a budget and organize for a Zoom session on a budget. So a budget is so crucial even in trainings as a DPO. Have a budget so that it can ease in your work as a data protection officer. And you need to convince your controller that if you are exposed to breach, some breaches are even more expensive than a 10 million shillings budget. So they ought to reason that way. Data privacy is a selling point and a bonus. So they ought to fund that office reasoning along that kind of line. The other challenge I think I've also dwelt in, but lightly, is on conflict of interest. So I was just saying, as a DPO, stay guarded. Stay guarded in the sense that do not do roles that would make you conflicted when you now sit down to do your work in terms of compliance, in terms of data privacy. Guard yourself from the regulations and the act, the laws in your country. Read the law and know the role of a DPO comes from this point A to point B. point C to point D. And even if tries to compel you, you are an independent office. He might be the appointing authority, but the moment you are appointed as a DPO, you become an independent office. And most people can never reconcile that fact that a DPO is an independent office, in spite of the fact that appointing authority is your boss. They ought not direct how to do your work as a data protection officer, because you are answerable to the data commissioner in terms of data compliance. And see, what is a DPO when you get into an organization? You create, there are so many things which I think the other speakers will you will create a help guide people in the organization, data processors, and even the data controller, create a record of processing agreements, or documents which detail from point A. Starts here, we keep the data for this long. Why do we keep it for this long? For instance, if we have a legal suit, for how long should we keep the data? Is it 5 years? Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? That kind of data, how do we destroy it? When you call people for an interview, for instance, and I'll give you an example of probably these processing initiatives. There's an organization when I found people ID, and this they had a name, it's an ID number, identification number, and it's a photo. So my question was, we have an ID, and we have a name, full name, and we have a staff number, and we have a photo on this job ID. To me, I felt that wasn't data minimization, and it wasn't data privacy by design. Why? Because in this era of fraud, exposure a country like Kenya is often very risky, because an ID is used to log into so many that data. So I employ the organization with the ID number, and leave have to suffice in that kind of a scenario. So you really need to do that data scan, help and guide the employees, because employees are the weakest link in organization data protection. Help them create their ROPA to know where data processes. The other is advice on data protection assessments. DPI, that as a data protection biggest fundamental human rights of data that you ought to know and you ought to guide appropriately. The other thing you ought to do, be a contact with the ODPC. Be the first to inform the ODPC, and I'll inform you the importance of being a contact with the ODPC. When a breach happens to your company, and you've been in daily contact with the ODPC, when you're creating something like a data privacy policy is inwards for the staff in. Notice is going out. Some people confuse notice and policy. Notice is for the public, policy is for internal. When you're drafting a policy or a notice, how about you share with the data commission and ask them, what can I amend here? What can I correct here? Ultimately, when you have and you go before the data and they see you always taking initiative to inquire, that can be used mitigation and reduce your sentence in terms of penalties and your exposure. So that is the joy of maintaining good contact with the data commissioner and keeping them abreast with any compliance initiatives, technical and organizational measures that your institution is undertaking in terms of preventing your exposure to data breaches. The other thing you want to do is training. I can't overemphasize the importance of training. Training is equally very important. Everybody ought to know what data compliance and data laws are. So training is a crucial cog in the wheel of data compliance. What to do is data subject requests. Respond to them. If a request you mandate person in the organization to answer data subject requests, communicate with the data subject and ensure data subject requests. The other thing you want to do, which I talked about, board buy-in. Always be in touch with the board. The other thing, ensure your post as a DPO is a management post. If you're not a manager and you are at the bottom of the organogram of an organization, even your influence with us in an organization. You cannot command if you are down at the bottom of the organogram. A data protection officer post is a manager, and if you're there, at least you can have that kind of necessary authority to guide the other employees in a position of authority. So there's no way you can be a very junior officer in an organization and be a data protection officer. It waters down your authority, and in terms of compliance management, you're a headache because you're at the lower end of the tire in terms of authority in an organization. So it's really important the board idea and they put somewhere at a place of authority where you can command the respect of other employees. It will help you in your work.
Hello, Timothy. Your network or your voice is breaking. Hello, Mr. Timothy, are you with us?
Basically, data breach. Data breach is a big topic that we cannot exhaust in this. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir. Your voice was breaking a little bit, but we can hear you now, sir.
Okay, now where did I lose you?
We heard when you said you were talking about data breaches, something we cannot completely cover.
Okay, so I was like, the point is, data breaches are a crucial point and a very special point that a DPO needs to be very careful in handling. You just ensure you guide. Don't be at the lead. Some people would argue you be at the lead. It's academic. From my advice, be a guide in terms of data breach management, but be at the forefront in terms of contact to the data commissioner in case there's a breach. So unless there's any question, I think Professor and Ezekiel have really exhausted most of the issues that we talk about. I would just be eager to probably answer a question directly. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to this in future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Timothy. Thank you to all our three mentors that, in the last, I would say roughly an hour, have, taking us through, over an hour, taking us through, the roles of a DPO, what is expected from a DPO, how they can contribute meaningful to society, the shortage and the need for those roles to be filled, and also how to, work as a DPO in practice. So thank you so much to our mentors for helping us run through that. Over the course of the week prior to class, we usually send out a task schedule for the students to work in preparation for sessions. They are expected to do a little research in relation to the topic and will come up with a presentation for which they will be presenting in class. So we'll be taking their presentation right about now. We have two groups that will be presenting in class. They both have 15 minutes each for their presentation. We'll take their presentations, and afterwards we'll be heading back to the mentors for their feedback based off of the presentations and anything that they would like to add in terms of maybe gaps, knowledge gaps that the mentees may have missed out on, right? So we would want to hear your thoughts about that shortly after the presentations are over. So just to quickly do that, group one presenter, if you're with us, we would like to take your presentation now. Let's quickly do that so that we can head over to group two and continue with the rest of class.
Hello, Mr. Dennis. Good evening. Hello, everyone. Please, Mr. Dennis, I would like to confirm if you can hear me. Please,
yes.
If you can't, please, kindly permit me to proceed to share my screen.
Okay, sorry, Adedoyin, sorry. Yeah, you can go ahead.
All right.
Let's try and the presentation, if you can make it within 10 to 15 minutes, that would be really fine.
Within what, sir? Now you said pardon me, sir, I didn't hear what you said earlier. You said if I can make it within how many minutes? I want
10
to
to
know.
15.
10 to 15 minutes. Okay, all right, okay.
All right. Please proceed.
Okay, I'll be sharing my screen now. All right, please, kindly confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much to all our thank you very much, Mr. Dennis. Thank you very much to all our wonderful mentors that have taken their time to really explain and really impart knowledge to us. I can speak for myself, and I hope I can speak for the others too, that we've really learned a great deal. So I'll now proceed to the presentation for Group 1. So our topic is navigating data protection regulations, the essential role of a data protection officer. So first is understanding the role of a data protection officer. The Nigerian Data Protection Act places the data protection officer at the act of compliance. Section 32 states that all data controllers and processors of major importance must appoint a DPO, either as an employee or under a service contract with expert knowledge of data protection law and practices. And I believe the NDPA envisages that there are some businesses that, although they may process a lot of customers or client data, but may not have the resources to employ a DPO permanently as an employee. So I believe with the NDPA foreseeing that, he also gave an alternative for them to consult a DPO if they cannot appoint a DPO as an employee. And I think that's like a very good initiative. And moving on, so next is understanding the role of a DPO. The core responsibility of a DPO mainly is advisory role to advise companies that deal in customers or client data or individual data, compliance monitoring, ensuring that the company adheres to policies, adheres to regulation, audit record keeping, regulatory license. The DPO acts as a license officer between the company and the NDP and other regulatory bodies, and also safeguard rights and perform risk assessment when the company is about to roll out a product, or when the company is trying to do something that pertains to data of its clients or its customers. So I believe the DPO performs risk assessment to ensure that the particular product or the particular initiative that the company is about to do does not lead to risking customers or clients' data. Next is significance of a DPO is that it's the same thing as the core responsibilities. Not necessarily the same thing, but they overlap. A DPO builds accountability in organization. They enhance trust in data-driven sectors, especially in banking, telecoms, fintech, and health. These are sectors that really deal with a lot of data. They protect against NDPC actions, as seen in the recent fines against organizations like Fidelity Bank. They also align Nigeria with global data protection standards, such as the GDPR and other regulatory provisions, international regulatory provisions. Now, challenges that DPO face. Understanding the role of DPO, the challenges, low awareness, especially among SMEs. Apart from even SMEs, there's still low awareness when it comes to data protection or data privacy in Africa at large, and even Nigeria. And especially for SMEs, that is small and medium scale enterprises, they do not understand the importance of appointing DPO, talk less of the importance of adhering to the NDP. And these are part of the challenges that that affects the role of data protection officers. Limited resources to hire, retain qualified DPOs, like I mentioned earlier, which I said I believe is a very good development that the NDP had the provision that for companies or businesses that cannot employ or retain DPOs, the option for them to consult on the consultancy basis. I think that's very good. So there are also limited. So businesses, one of the challenges that businesses face in appointing DPOs is that limited resources to hire or retain qualified DPOs. Next is possible conflict of interest when rules overlap. Next is a developing regulatory environment, still refining enforcement and guidance. Like I said earlier, data protection as a concept is still very new. So businesses are still trying to adhere to the provisions of the NDP, talk less of going all the way to appoint a DPO. So they are not really aware of the NDP in total, to the extent that they understand that they actually need to consult or have a DPO, especially for businesses that involve themselves or that process a lot of the customers or clients' data. Importance of compliance and enforcement is for businesses that comply and also apply with the provision of the NDP that they need to consult or retain the service of a DPO. For them, it's part of the importance that they have with adhering to this particular provision of the NDP is that it builds accountability and client trust. When a business understands that a particular company as a DPO, that is data protection officer, or consult a data protection officer, they are very, like, it just gives them, it gives the client and customer trust that yes, I can be very sure that since there is a data protection officer in this company, I can be 100% or 99% sure that this particular DPO would work with the company to ensure that my data is safe. It just makes clients or customer trust the company more better. It also helps with deterrence because failure to comply with data protection laws are usually met with sanctions. And for DPO, it ensures that organizations are actively concerned about the rights of data subjects and how to maintain compliance with data protection laws. So having a DPO would ensure that companies maintain compliance with data protection laws. Inclusion on the NDPP's website as a compliance organization. So the NDPP's website has a list of compliance organizations. And so this list contains organizations who have filed their annual data audits on or before March 15th. By being compliant, extending to appointing or having a data protection officer on standby, it shows that an organization is compliant, and then such kind of organization will be listed on the list for the year. Next is legal certainty and risk mitigation. The NDPR and the guide provision provides a framework for companies to understand their obligations, strategies in protecting data subjects. As for being compliant with organizations, being compliant meaning that organizations are appointing or consulting the data protection officers, it helps them mitigate security risk and reduce the chance of any data breaches from occurring. Next is protection of rights. The NDPR safeguards Nigerian citizen rights to consent, transparency, erasure, and secure data processing. So having a data protection on board, it shows that a company or a business leans toward protection of rights of its clients or of its customers. Next is reduced risk of data loss. Yes, when an organization has a data protection officer on board, it reduces risk of data loss because data protection officer is a professional, quote unquote, and so would do their work effectively and ensure that there is a minimized risk of data loss. Next is avoiding breaches of data protection laws and fines. A data protection officer would ensure that a business avoid breaches of data protection laws and fines. So when is a DPO required? So Section 32 of the NDPA mandates that for data controllers of major importance, the appointment of a DPO is mandatory. They are obliged under the NDPA to designate a DPO with expert knowledge of data protection law and practices, and the ability to carry out this task prescribed under the NDPA and subsidiary legislation made under it. Under the NDPR and the implementation framework, every data controller is required to designate or appoint a DPO for purpose of ensuring adherence to the NDPA, relevant data privacy instruments, and data protection directive of the data controller. So in addition, an organization that is based in Nigeria would be required to appoint a designated DPO who is resident in Nigeria and has full access to the management team in Nigeria. If the organization falls within the following categories of data controllers: 1, the entity is a government organ, ministry, department, institution, or agency. 2, the core activities of the organization involves processing personal data of over 10,000 data subjects per annum. C, the organization processes sensitive personal data in the regular course of its business. D, the organization possesses critical national information infrastructure as defined under the Cyber Crimes Act or any amendments thereto consisting of personal data. So essentially, what I'm saying is that it is not made essential for all businesses operating in Nigeria to appoint a DPO, but it is essential for these 4 categories that I mentioned here, that they ought to appoint a DPO when the business is or the organization is a government organ, ministry, or entity, where the particular business processes personal data of over 10,000 data subjects, where the organization processes sensitive personal data such as health in the regular course of its business, and that the organization possesses critical national information infrastructure as defined under the Cyber Crimes Act or any amendment thereto consisting of personal data. So a DPO can be voluntarily acquired if the organization handles a significant amount of personal data. This with the high volume of data processing requests belong to an industry that is prone to data breaches. So essentially, the part that I mentioned earlier is made mandatory by the NDP, while this second category is made for businesses that it's not necessarily made mandatory, but it is advice necessary to appoint DPO for this kind of businesses. So a business that handles a significant amount of personal data, I wouldn't even say it is voluntary, because for a business that handles a significant amount of personal data, if that business does not appoint a DPO and there's a data breach or there's any data, well, let's say there's a data breach, the business would be liable and the NDP would definitely sanction them. So I would say it is not necessarily voluntary. I would say it's common sense for a business that handles a significant amount of personal data to appoint a DPO or consult a DPO. Also for a business that deals with high volume of data processing requests, and also belongs to an industry that is prone to data breaches, such as fintechs, banking, health, and telecoms. These businesses that operate in this different industry that I just mentioned really deal and sit on a large amount of data. And so it is usually advised, even if they are not mandated by the NDPA, they don't fall under the mandatory organization or category the NDPA mandates to appoint DPO. It is only advised to appoint a DPO or consult a data protection officer. So part of the need for DPO is that data breaches can wreck your business. So it is very advisable to to have a DPO on standby. A DPO is an expert, is a professional in data protection and privacy, and so it is so there will the DPO will ensure that data breaches do not occur, because data breaches can wreck your business. So DPOs make data security easy. DPOs also help businesses work smarter. They help business appear more trustworthy. So next is appointing a DPO. Key steps and consideration in appointing a DPO. The implementation framework of the NDPR requires every data controller to appoint a designated DPO within 6 months of commencing business or within 6 months of the issuance of the NDPR implementation framework, where one or more of the following are present. 1, the entity is a government organ, ministry, department, institution, or agency. 2, the core activities of the organization involves the processing of the personal data of over 10,000 data subjects per annum. The organization processes sensitive personal data in the regular course of its business. For the organization possesses critical national information infrastructure consisting of personal data. Furthermore, the appointed DPO of every ministry, department, and government agency is required to possess proven knowledge of data protection to oversee the functions of the data protection units within the MDE. In the same vein, the Nigerian subsidiary of a multinational company to which any of the above stated criteria applies is required to appoint a DPO who will be based in Nigeria and give him full access to the multinational's management in Nigeria. The DPO of the Nigerian subsidiary may report to the global original DPO. In essence, a DPO is expected to possess the following: 1, professional expertise in Nigerian data protection laws and practices; 2, an in-depth understanding of applicable data protection laws; 3, requisite knowledge to undertake the responsibilities identified below. So 1, knowledge of the regulation. You can't teach what you don't know. Essentially, you can't guide people with common sense when it comes to data privacy laws and its attendant implementations. Therefore, a DPO must understand the law and understand how it applies to businesses. This feature is the bedrock of every DPO requirement. Now, next is understand the basic implementation techniques. Most people argue that the theoretical knowledge is enough. No, that is not true at all. As a DPO, you must understand some basic technicalities. For example, a DPO should know how to relate with IT and other departments for a data subject access request. You must know how to manage various you must know how to merge various work functions to meet certain principles within the regulation. You don't have to know how to write security codes, but you should know what to tell the writer of those codes. A DPO must be a good project manager. Having this skill is very important. The DPO must be able to create and manage the end-to-end data privacy life cycle. Next is that a DPO must be a good communicator. It is worth reiterating that data privacy is a team game. However, there's one factor that makes the team align and work towards a single goal. That factor is called communication. A DPO must communicate to various stakeholders in the organization to drive home the data privacy mission and vision. If the team members are not clear about their roles and responsibilities, it can affect the overall data privacy function. Next is ability to work independently. Because the DPO controls many facets of the data privacy frameworks and reports straight into the C-suite level, a data protection officer must work independently without guidance. Next is demonstrate leadership. A DPO role sits on a managerial level, and most times this individual will have people reporting to him or her about certain statuses. Therefore, a DPO must demonstrate good leadership qualities. That is one crucial skill that stands out in a DPO leadership role. Next is display business and interpersonal. A data privacy is a business function. As such, the DPO must display excellent company and interpersonal understanding. Next is understand the basic implementation technicalities. A DPO must understand the business operations, how data flows within the business, and how those data sets feed the business process. So that is the end of our presentation. To sum it up, just to summarize everything I said here, I would say that every business, whether it is a business that does not fall under the categories that the NDPA mandates to appoint DPO, should understand that when you deal with customer data, when you sit on a large amount of customers' data, it is essentially, it behoves on you to have a DPO on standby or a data protection professional for you to consult, because when data breaches happen, it affects your business, it affects the trust that clients or customers have in your business, and at the end, it can wreck your business. It is very important. Also, it can lead to sanctions, it can lead to fines. Essentially, it can lead to a business that has been a company or a business that has been running for, let's say, 20 years or 10 years. Just one data breach or just a any data accident can wreck that business. And it just goes to show that data protection officers are not just requirements that need to be met, they are very essential rather in the running of a business, especially a business that deals in data, and businesses that especially in industries that deal with a lot of data, such as health, telecoms, fintechs, banking, like I mentioned earlier. And I also mentioned the essential qualities that data protection officers must have. And apart from that, a data protection officer must know their own onions. It is not enough that a lot of people are parading themselves as data protection officers. You must really know what it is. You must really understand the core of the business that you are helping as a data protection officers. And so with this, this is the end of our presentation for Group 1. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, thank you very much, Adedoyin, for your presentation. Well done to you and to your team for putting it together. We appreciate the efforts. Yeah, so before we head back to the mentors, we'll take the final presentation from Group 2, and then we'll go back to our mentors. Please, the presenter for Group 2, we'll be taking your presentation now. Let's try to stick to time. You have 10 to 15 minutes to quickly run through your presentation. All right, so yeah. Group 2 presenter, if you're with us, we'll be taking your presentation now. Sorry, do we have the presenter for Group 2 in class? Okay. It seems we don't have the presenter for Group 2 in class. But because we have fast spent on time and we cannot spend time waiting, we would just be taking feedback from the mentors, and then we will take questions and call it a day. So feedback, yes, we will start back from the top, from the very top. Mrs. Benedicta, if you're still with us. Okay, she isn't on the call anymore. I guess she had to step off call. So Prof, yeah, so you listened to the presentation from Group 1. They were able to share what they were able to research and find out on the roles of a data protection officer. We would just want you to maybe, if there are any knowledge gaps you would like to fill, and then overall comments on their work. We would like to take your comments, sir.
Yeah, well, first, of course, congratulations on the presentation. I think that it encompassed almost everything. And one point actually that caught my attention, and I think that's directly connected to what I mentioned before, which is, and I would like to highlight that, I mean, the work, of course, is very strong in terms of, well, being based on the requirements and etc. But just as a very quick suggestion is, like I said, to try to put that in practice, having that approach from the general or more abstract thoughts, which are those that we see coming from the legislation, but also translating that in practical actions. And what I mean by that, for example, in terms of the data breach that was mentioned, of course, that ideally we should keep in mind, or we should, as DPOs, think, oh, let's avoid data breaches. And of course, I'm not saying that we don't have to think like that. Of course that we have to think like that. But we have also to be open, and this is my point of view, which is data breaches will happen. I probably already heard that kind of joke that says, well, a data breach, and this is what I always say, I said to companies when I'm, well, providing trainings or whatever, like internally or externally, is the thing about a data breach is not if it will happen, but when it will happen. Why am I mentioning that? Because of course we have to avoid or try to avoid data breaches, but we also have to be prepared to the fact that data breaches will happen anyways. And I give you a very simple example. Assume that you were working in your workstation, and then you have your work colleague right beside you, and then you have like an Excel file with information about the employees of the company. And let's assume that your colleague, who is sitting again right beside you, they don't have to access that information. They don't have to see it. They don't. It's not up to them to have access to that. Simply put. And then you just turn around and you're talking to another person, or maybe you just go to the bathroom, or maybe you just go get some water, and then you forget to lock your workstation, your computer. And then that colleague just looked like he's not doing anything malicious, but he just looked to that Excel file, and then he sees that information there, whatever about employees. This is a data breach already, because your colleague wasn't supposed to have access to that information, but they had. So it is a data breach. And again, I would like to connect that to what I mentioned before. What's the level of risk of this data breach? So I would say, based on my experience, that, this is, at least initially, I would say that this is a low-level risk, because it's your colleague, and although they shouldn't access or see that information, they've seen it, but then you can come back, and then when you sit in your chair, and then they mention, oh, I saw that information about XYZ, and then you say, hey, you shouldn't be talking about it. I mean, it's not up to you to get that information. So you have like a low risk, which is completely different if that Excel file was sent, for example, to a commercial partner of the company. And your company has an agreement, even a commercial agreement with that other company. So here it's completely different. But again, what's the level of risk? Because it's of course another company. It is a breach, especially because that other company, of course, shouldn't have access to that. But you have an agreement. You have an ongoing commercial relationship. So as the DPO, what would you recommend on that case? And these two situations are completely different from a hacker accessing the system. Or not only a hacker, but an employee sending an email to the wrong addressee, for example. Emails have that autocomplete function, and then maybe you are sending to John whatever, and you just put John, but another surname. And you're not paying attention, you are talking to your colleague, and then you just type, and then, oh, is this John? And then you click and you send, and then you send to someone who you don't know who this John is. And you can't call to this John and say, hey, I'm sorry, but I sent a wrong file to you, so please delete it. And you can do that if you're sending the email to the other company with which you have a commercial relationship, for example. So here, I mean, how do we translate the legal requirement of let's avoid data breaches, or data breaches don't have to happen, can't happen? How do you translate that in practice when you see these three different scenarios? One, it's your colleague right beside you. Second is a commercial partner. You have an agreement. Third is a completely different company or person outside of your company. So this is the point that I would like to make here. I mean, of course, that the content of the presentation was very good, but I would suggest you to always look at the legislation and try to put that in practice, to think on how to translate that in procedures in practice, so that you can, like I said before, you can come and say, yes, as the DPO, I'm sure that the company is compliant, or at least the company is compliant in topic A or B or C. Because again, in practice, and of course, this is not to diminish anyone's work, but I would say that in practice, it's very hard to find a company, any company, that is 100% compliant with everything. I mean, I have my personal opinion on that. I think that that's impossible, but I'll give the benefit of doubt here. Maybe there's a company, I don't know, that it's completely 100% compliant. But in any case, I mean, this is our day-to-day job. I mean, we have to read the legislation. We have to read these international standards from ISO, for example, or NIST, or whatever other standard, and then we have to translate that in practical actions, so that at the end of the day we can come and say, yes, the company is compliant. Yes, everything is going as it's supposed to be going, or at least in the right direction. And do our work. And a final point here, of course, that the construction of the compliance, that won't happen in one day, that won't happen in 1 week, that won't happen in 1 month. So it will take time. And then again, you brought the constraints, like financial constraints, but also awareness constraints, which is very important. And then, as Timothy mentioned before, I mean, the DPO has to translate that to the business. And I don't think that we as DPOs, we can just come to the business and say, hey, you have a legislation to comply with, because this would create some resistance. So I think that it's also part of the DPO to know how to convince the main stakeholders that that's important, that, well, we have to do that, for example, not only because it's a legal obligation, but because, well, it's needed, because it will bring financial benefits to the company. So this translation, as I'm calling here, like this translation from the legalese of the legislation to the practical day-to-day actions, it's something that I always suggest students to focus on, because this is very important to actually make the DPO work happen in practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, for your shared thoughts. We hope that the students in class were paying close attention to everything that you shared, also with the corrections that you also put forward. So yes, we'll be heading back to Mr. Timothy before we take questions. Mr. Timothy, if you're with us, we also want to get your comments on the presentation, maybe anything you'd like to share.
Yes, so just to thank you, Professor, for the insights you've given regarding the presentation. I'll just pick up from where Prof left before I just tell you the specific issues regarding the just made presentation of Group 1. Just like Professor said, compliance is not a stage, it is a process. It's not a station, it's a process. And that's why we talked about project management skills, monitoring and evaluation. Always monitor and evaluate your project. So you need to be a project manager as a DPO. And there is never a stage for compliance. You deal with a breach today, tomorrow you have another breach. You deal with a breach next year, another breach that comes the following year. So it's never a stage in terms of compliance. It's a daily business and always round the clock, 24 hours work. With regard to translation, which Prof has also mentioned, it's important. Like in Kenya here, we have 2 national languages, Kiswahili and English. When I make a notice to the public, I translate it into Swahili, even if it's in English. Why? Because when I go to the data commissioner, when a data subject goes to the data commissioner and you talk about a notice you gave them in English, they would easily contest that they don't understand English. And that would easily swing in their favor. In Nigeria, for instance, I don't know how many languages you have, but those indigenous languages are equally very important. That if you have a notice, you translate it. Those are the kind of people you're dealing with, especially in a hospital setting, dealing with health data. If you're making a notice to a patient, make the notice. If it's in Yoruba, if it's in Igbo, I don't know, but I'm just guessing and speculating. That is the only way you can confirm to the data commissioner that indeed this data subject understood the notice we gave them with regard to the opt-in, opt-out options in our in our privacy notice. So it is important to do that. I was just marrying that point to what Professor just talked about. And the other thing was, I remember dealing with a client some time back. He was a data controller who wanted to offer us some procurement platform, which would also be taking some of our patients' data. And my question was, where is the server of this information? And he was saying, oh, our servers are in the US and they're with Microsoft, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay. And he's saying Microsoft are tamper proof, they are not hackable. No institution or software is unhackable. Hacks happen everywhere, every day, whether Microsoft, whether who, whether Grok, or where, anywhere, a hack can happen. So I can't just allow you to take our patient data and put on Microsoft without assurances of may happen in case of a breach. And that is why I was emphasizing on localization of our data in our local servers and not in servers, Microsoft servers in the US in that context. So that is just an example of how you ought to argue as a DPO when you're even making a contract, a data sharing contract with a company, whether it's by Microsoft or AWS in the cloud, any place is hackable. So be very cautious about the contracts you sign and take that initiative to cover your data controller along those lines. The other thing, which I also forgot to mention, okay, the presentation by Group 1 by Adedoyin rightly mentioned C-suite for a DPO. Very important. And I'll tell you an example from my experience working in a hospital. There was this medical report that doctors used to generate after diagnosing and examining a patient. This medical report, the doctors never used to send it directly to the patient. They used to use a third party who is a customer care person. And these customer care persons or even random people who are hired for a week, they disappear. Hired for 2 weeks, they disappear. And they've already had access to a medical report. So I took exception with that kind of an initiative. And I said, no, a doctor can't do a medical report and give to a customer care person to send to a patient with full access. That kind of thing is a data breach and it is a very high risk kind of data processing. So I could not give my authority or make any authorized decisions to the doctors because the doctors are in the C-suite. I have to be a C-suite person as a DPO to have that authority to tell the doctors, let's do this. So group 1, that C-suite for a DPO is right. Project management skills, which I equally talked about earlier and you've mentioned, that is a plus for your presentation. You also talked about the ROPA, record of processing activities, which is equally very important. One thing which I think didn't come out very clearly, but I'm not diminishing the effort, the good and excellent presentation you've made, data subject requests, a very integral part, married even to the data breaches. Data subject requests, you ought to have a way of managing data subject requests because we can't agree all the time that a data subject request has to be answered to. You may have answered to a data subject request today, the same person tomorrow, the same person the day after, the same person Friday. I lost the information. The same person next week. You have to have a deterrent measure somehow and have reasonable measures of managing data subject requests. I've been in a position where I'm handling data subject requests with this same data subject coming for the same information 10 times. So you ought to create mechanisms of managing that. Overall, Group 1 had a very good presentation at your level. I would encourage you to keep at it. Put your best foot forward. You're in the right path. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Timothy, for your shared thoughts. We really, really, really do appreciate. So we'll be taking questions from the mentees and the participants. We'll be taking questions from the participants right about now. So please, if we have questions, let's do well to ask us for the participants. We have Mr. Timothy and Prof in class to help us run through questions. So yeah, indicate by raise of hand or just send your questions into the chat box. Do we have questions in class for our mentors? Okay. So I want to assume that we don't have any questions. All right. Thank you once again to Mr. Timothy, to Prof. Mateus, and to Mrs. Benedita in Essential. It has been a very, very interesting 2 hours in class, talking about the roles of a DPO, some of the regulations, and also compliance. We really, really appreciate your shared time and your shared knowledge in class. And we look forward to facilitating other conversations with you in subsequent coming periods and quarters. So once again, to the mentees, well done to you guys for staying to the end of class. Please do not forget to share what you have learned on your different social media platforms. You can do well to tag our mentors. If you have questions, we'll share their flyers with you. So if in case you want to reach out to them, I think Prof has his details on his flyers, so you can always kindly reach out to him if you have any questions you would want him to help you tackle. Once again, a big thank you to our mentors and to the mentees. We've officially come to the end of the data privacy and protection class. The dynamics around classes will be changing come next week. So look out in your group for the informations that will be sent out to you tomorrow or next. All right. Thank you everyone for being available. Good night and have a lovely night rest. Thank you everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you.